And then I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who is our kind of our MC or our master of ceremonies.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just before, so we're recording right now. So maybe I'll just get things started. So, Bob and I are on a journey of collaboration, thanks to Clubhouse in particular. And this is our fourth Clubhouse conversation. It's themed under the banner of economic development and small business, well, business in general, small business specifically, because those things are definitely intertwined. And today is the first time that we are going to record. So the idea is we're recording this Clubhouse conversation, so please be aware of that. If my technological skills are such, we're going to turn it into a podcast and possibly continue to do it that way. So I just want to let folks know that. Bob, why don't I turn it over to you to open up the meeting and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time on your lunch hour to join us for economic development conversations. Today, Dan and I really wanted to bring up the subject around remote work. So, we can obviously all appreciate with what's happening globally, the way we work, not just as business owners, but as employees has been greatly impacted and changed. And so Dan and I are always curious to hear what other people's views are, thoughts are on what does remote work look like moving forward. It's really easy, I think, for people to say, well, you just go on Zoom meetings and you just check your cell phone. But there's a lot of other variants and a lot of other considerations around remote work, not just the actual work, but thinking about it emotionally, thinking about it physically, all of these other components as well. So we wanted to generate that conversation today. So just to, let you know what we're talking about today, if you haven't already, please take a look at whom's on our stage right now. I did invite my friend Dior without introducing her, my apologies, but feel free to, as you hear a speaker, if they really, really resonate with you, feel free to connect with them, follow them, because Dan and I also join in a lot of other rooms on Clubhouse as well. For those of you that are a bit new to Clubhouse or to the room, if you're interested in participating in the discussion, or if you have a thought that you think would really, really be helpful, on the very bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that has a hand over what looks like a written tablet. If you press that and raise your hand, it'll enable us to invite you to the stage. And again, Dan and I really, really love just facilitating conversations. So rather than he and I speaking all the time, we really, really want to hear from all of you on your thoughts of what does remote work look like? What does it look like now? What could it look like in an ideal world? And, in the past, we've been really blessed to get into some deeper conversations, such as, well, what does remote work look like for different genders and different backgrounds and different cultures and different towns, whether they're urban or remote. So that's really the intro to that. So why don't we start off with I'll throw it to the audience in the interim. If is there anyone that would like to join us on stage, or I know Mark is multitasking. I don't know if Dior or Isabel want to chime in about what are your thoughts about remote work? What does remote work look like?
Bob, maybe I can add a little bit. First, hi everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I always
Yeah.
like to joke that even if you invited me to the darkest forest, I'll probably still join. So, um,
Could introduce yourself, Dior, because I know you, but I'd love for everyone.
absolutely. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm the founder of Promoted to Mom, which is a digital platform that really helps moms particularly navigate motherhood and work, so helping them thrive in both places. So this is a topic for me that's pretty close to my heart. And the reason why is I find that in the remote work conversation, we tend to exclude a bit the needs of parents and how sometimes remote working isn't ideal because that line between your home life and your work life get easily blurred. And I particularly think about moms in particular who might have childcare challenges, and so you're at home, and you may have some space challenges, so you don't have a dedicated office, and here you are now navigating between taking care of a child, whether that's a toddler or someone a bit older, at the same time as having to work and focus on whether that's meetings or deliverables. So I think for me personally, and for the moms that I've spoken to in particular, the hybrid model is probably the ideal, which is work from home when you want to and on some days when that makes sense to you, and then remaining days have the ability to whether go to your own office, or if you're working for a corporation or a company, be able to go there physically. And I think that change of environment is sometimes really beneficial, to be able to have a harder line between that home life and that work life, which I think, as we've learned in the last year, gets easily blurred. So that's just that perspective that I wanted to add as a proud mom.
Thank you, Dior. So what I hear you saying is there really needs to be not only this consideration of childcare, but also this consideration of, not getting stuck in one place, being able to get out there to other spaces. Now, along that line, Dior, and maybe someone else can also comment on this. I've heard sort of this transition of a lot of co-work spaces that traditionally targeted entrepreneurs looking at remote workers and saying to them, you know what, remote working doesn't mean you still can't enjoy our space. So I can see to your point where there's a lot of value in that for sure. Dan, did you want to add to that point as well?
Well, it's interesting, and Kate, who works with me in the town of Innisfil, I think is on the call. I wouldn't mind inviting her up after I chat, or, as part of the conversation. It can be a little bit later, no problem. Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we, and certainly in economic development that we're looking at, is how do we facilitate an amazing remote work experience? So, for example, if you live in the town of Innisfil and you're a remote worker, how do we help you with loneliness, social, daycare, uh, collaboration, interaction with other people, advocacy for your employer, etc. So I think there's this new, I don't know if it's a paradigm or not, but there's going to be this new view that not only is maybe your company and yourself part of the facilitation of what does remote work look like, but a broader community where we can figure out how do we make that experience not isolating, helpful for mental health, child care, maybe parental care, depending on those sandwich generations that have kids, older parents, etc. So yeah, I think we're barely at the tip of the iceberg, and COVID, I think, notwithstanding, it's just really been the accelerant, really, to focus us on how do we move forward.
I think what would be what is interesting with this new situation is that though we can feel isolated, working remotely has opened the door to have sometimes conversations with entrepreneurs that we would have not had time in the past to have, simply because we don't have to go to meet with them in their office or in town. So what I've come to experience is actually I have more frequent conversation with entrepreneurs that are that appreciate having this, I would say, online conversation while they're doing something else. So they need the communication, they need to have those conversations, but they don't have the time. And now somehow they do have the time, or they make the time to have those conversations. So I think there's the silver lining in everything. And currently we are rethinking how we should have those discussions. And there's still a lot of value to it, because we can take the time to talk about concerns, opportunities, and sometimes just what is happening and how it should be addressed.
Thank you, Isabel. Those are some insightful comments as well. I also invited Angelique, Laura, and Carrie to the stage. I'm wondering, Carrie, with your group of women that you support, this wonderful group that you have in Durham, I'm curious to hear. I don't know if many of them are entrepreneurs in nature, or are they sort of a crossover. What are you hearing about remote work? What are your thoughts about it?
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you guys hosting this conversation. And it's conversations like this that make remote working so wonderful, because we do feel connected to each other. And that's the whole thing with the women's network that we developed. And I think that sort of with what's happening right now with the pandemic is that we're we're staying more connected, and people love the fact that we have these relationships. And some of the things are similar to what you guys are doing in Durham Women's Network chat, where we get Facebook Live and sort of have conversations with different people. I think the biggest thing that I've been hearing is just really mental health issues, and just, because people are feeling that loneliness. I know I felt it, especially when we were really locked down. And for me, it's been about, staying really healthy, and, connecting on Zoom classes and staying fit that way, and sort of keeping my vibe high, but also really staying connected with people. And I think it has been a blessing that we've had groups like this, so that we can support one another. And that's kind of what we're experiencing within our network.
That's a really great point, Carrie. I know in my past, when I've been in a work environment, the water cooler, that experience between on breaks or in between meetings, it's always nice to have those bridged connections with other team members as well. And trying to replicate that in the remote environment can be a bit tricky, for sure.
Yeah. The other thing I've sort of been finding a bit challenging is just trying to work from home. Like, for a lot of it, I was working from the dining room table and just kind of set up properly. And I've been talking with our group, and we've just talked about how important it is to kind of carve out that space somewhere in your home, so that you don't feel like work is taking over your entire life and your family and your dining space and your family space. And so I've been a little more mindful, and just kind of getting my house set up in a way that I feel that I'm not always having to like run into my bedroom and have a call because I need to shut the door. So I don't know if everybody has, great dedicated spaces, but having that for me has been a good thing.
It's funny you say that. That's a really good point as well, having a defined and especially an ergonomic space to work. About a few years ago, when I was working with a builder, they were talking about this concept of, there was a lot of these sort of plus one rooms or these dens that, people weren't using as much, and they were looking at making them more into health spaces where you could set up a yoga mat, a little workroom. But now what I'm hearing is there's now this return to, with this increased idea of remote work, builders are now looking at, we should really be looking at putting those plus one spaces back in. So again, people have those defined areas to work. Thank you, Carrie. That's a really great thought.
My pleasure. Thanks for including me.
Of course.
Bob, I'm wondering
Yes.
if I just add a few things. The other thing too is variety. So, I mean, there's a lot of monotony when you work at home, meaning you're at your desk, you're on your Zoom calls, you're in your confined space. In my line of work, I would get out a lot, as I imagine many people do. So it mixes up the day. Obviously, the human interaction makes a big difference. And so I think the variety is a big thing as well. And maybe later on you want to bring Brennan on, and he might want to talk a little bit about builder and builder spaces, which I know he knows quite a bit about.
Yeah, I sent him an invite to speak, so I'm not sure if he's seeing it. Hopefully. Okay. Well, hopefully he'll get that. But in the interim, thank you, Dan. That's another great insight to add. Laura, I'd love to hear, how are things with you? What's your thoughts on this concept of remote work?
Well, thanks so much. And again, what a great topic for us to be discussing right now. It's incredibly timely. I think that there's several things from an economic development standpoint that we need to be considering. One, remote workers on average have a tendency to work more. So I think companies like the additional productivity, and I do believe that there will be a permanent shift toward more remote work. That means that I think there will be less demand for office space. I'm not saying that there will be no demand for office space, because I still think that there is a need for collaboration that doesn't occur in the same way via Zoom call. And so I think you'll still see companies have offices, but the demand to be sitting at a desk, I think, is going to be minimized. But of course, with this, it means that there needs to be more engagement. So I think amenities in office buildings are going to change. I think communities have to look at what amenities are around the office spaces that people are going to come back into. Um, so continuing to look at how we support our micro businesses, the stores and restaurants that make our downtowns and office centers special, is going to be critical. And then, I think ultimately one of the biggest concerns that communities are going to have to address is the broadband and cybersecurity, and how we're going to support infrastructure projects that may not look like streets and roads, but really provide the opportunity for workers to thrive in their homes or in their offices. So those are just my initial thoughts on this topic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Laura. That's really some great thoughts as well. I don't have anyone here that's an expert in cybersecurity, but you make a good point, right? There is a risk that with companies now having employees log in outside of their secure network, there does increase the risks as well. But as you started talking about spaces, I thought that was a perfect segue for me to head over to Brennan and maybe ask Brennan what his thoughts are when we think about spaces and how spaces are impacted when it comes to remote work. Welcome, Brennan. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Just going to do a quick audio check. Everybody can hear me all right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, a few thoughts on this. I've given a lot of thought, frankly, to, what the future of work looks like and spaces. And I highlighted on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, got some really good engagement on, this sort of public co-working space concept. You build a mixed use building. On the ground floor, you've got, a co-working space, which is rather large, funded by condo fees. So you've got that sustainability aspect, but then you've also got a public element. So it literally, you may have a third party operator, or the building itself may operate it. And it's open as, public infrastructure, but also that sort of private infrastructure for the condo owners. So, those type of concepts I think will accelerate. The pie in Canada, especially in Ontario and the GTA, is increasing. So I don't think you're going to see a significant decrease in office demand. I think that'll stay, relatively consistent, or maybe the growth rate will go down a little bit. But what I think you'll see is the type of offices that get built are flexible. So for example, when I presented at EDCO earlier this month, or early last month, talked about the Deloitte model of, removing dedicated desks and moving towards a bit more of a co-working model where, you're essentially more flexible to work where you need to work, whether that's at the office or at home. And, there's the Zoom fatigue, there's literally exhaustion from remote work. And there's a difference, right? We're not necessarily working remotely right now. We're working at home during a pandemic. It's a little different. It's kind of forced remote work. But I think once we escape the clutches of COVID, there's going to be greater opportunities, and people will actually open up, I think, to the flexibility that it provides to say, work at home 2-3 days a week, go into the office a couple of days, maybe work at a co-working space, work at the local library, the cafe. It's really just that flexibility. We don't need dedicated desks in most cases. So again, I think you're going to see an acceleration of co-working. Even, people, co-workers have moved, away from open office towards, sort of private offices during the pandemic. But I think you will see new co-working operators, or, renovations to those existing spaces that do encourage collaboration and flexibility. The power of co-working is the community within the space. It's not necessarily just the office space that you have at home. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Brennan. Thank you. I thought what was really insightful was when you really clarified this idea of forced remote work, right? The assumption that people are looking at where they are now is what remote work is. So thanks for that clarification. Really quick, before I include you, Dan, I just wanted to reset the room. I just wanted to make sure and welcome some of our new guests that have joined us. And just to clarify, today we're really talking about what does remote work look like for economic developers, but for community leaders as well. What does it look like now, and what's it going to look like in the future? If you haven't yet, all these folks on stage are amazing thought leaders. Make sure that you follow them and connect with them. A lot of folks on this stage are talking in other rooms on similar subjects. So please make sure to show some love to our speakers here and connect and follow with them here on Clubhouse. And anyone in our audience that wants to come on stage and share some thoughts, if you could, there's a little icon on the bottom that's got a hand with a notepad on top of it. When you press that, it's a hand raise, and any of the moderators can invite you on stage to share some of your knowledge as well. So we thank you all for being here and making the time. Dan, did you want to throw in some thoughts as well after Brennan there?
All good. No, I think the speakers have great thoughts. I just wanted to remind people as well that that we are recording today, so just be aware of that. And with any luck, I'm going to turn this into a podcast and put it out there and share this great conversation with the world.
Thank you, Dan, for that reminder. Brandon, thank you for joining us on stage, as well as Suzanne. Suzanne, did you want to participate in the chat really quick?
So it's Suzanne Recruitment here from Peterborough, and the Kawarthas Economic Development. And it's interesting when you know, what we're seeing is the I'm going to call them the remote worker that used to commute to the GTA, and now they, and their summer home or their second resident was where they would come to vacation. And now they're finding that they're coming here and the ability they have to work. We're also noticing, some of the government buildings, of course, are staying empty, and that is really affecting our downtown as well. That being said, though, it's really interesting to see the amount of people that have become very comfortable working from home, and the thought of them having to go back to the way the office used to be is causing anxiety. So they're comfortable in the sense that they'll do a mix. They'll do, 2 days into an office, 3 days at home, or vice versa. But the thought of going back full time, they've shifted their lifestyle. They've shifted the commute. They've shifted how they work at home, and it's it'll be interesting to see, because the other side is, well, we are going to go back into the office, and people are saying, do I really have to? I can still do my job. And it allows us to get out as economic development professionals. It certainly allows us to get out into the community more, because we're already out there. Like, we're home now, and we're able to go, and walk and see businesses and have a different level of communication with them. So I'm just, I think it's interesting to look at the other side as well.
I'm with you, Suzanne. Thank you for sharing that thought. I think, for all of us thinking about that 1 to 2 commute, whether it's in our car or on the go, I think it is a bit overwhelming. So you've got a really good point. I agree. A lot of people are thinking, how can I make this work working from home? And in turn, get less commute, increased productivity hours, probably some form of life balance, work-life balance, right? Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Carol and Jen have just joined us on stage, and so I'm sure that they have some thoughts that they want to share. Carol, did you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, thank you for to both of you for this great forum. But I just wanted to add to Suzanne's earlier point and some of the comments I've heard. Whether it's that variety that Dan talked about. For me, and my question to the rest of the group is, we keep talking about the motivations and what's valuable to the worker. Whether it's childcare, great restaurant, great food scene. One of the things I think will be really interesting a year from now is, what are the trends that did move talent, let's just say, from the GTA to other parts of Ontario or the rest of the country, or even international. So what's been, as I've been listening to everyone, one of the questions that comes to mind is, a year from now, like, how will we know if it was, whether it was, a larger home or childcare services, or what another community can offer these talented workers and companies. So I'm just wondering if anyone has had any thoughts on, how do we start to track these trends? What are organizations, and I work for the city of Hamilton, and it's something that it's on my mind. A year from now, even our own workforce. How are we a year from now? A lot of different motivations. How can we start to track, or at least start to understand? Because I think you're all right. We're just at the beginning of this. So wondering if anyone had any thoughts on how you've heard. I know tech is a great, a lot of tech companies, they actually know, they've got the data, and they're starting to think about this group of workers really wants to be urban. This group of worker maybe starting a family, maybe wants some more space. So just opening it up to the group, if anyone's had some thoughts on how do we start to track what's happening.
Thanks, Carol. That's a really great point. So I don't know that I have an answer, but I'll set the stage for maybe going a bit deeper on that. So my background is in the creative economy and the sort of the school of Richard Florida, and you touched a lot of on that point about quality of place and quality of life. So I'm gonna suggest 2 points and then open it up to the floor. So one is, I think we need to make sure that we part of our economic development and our community strategy is to make sure that we're building quality of life in mind. So we talked a little bit about some of these remote worker strategies, plus other amenities in your community, plus keeping downtowns alive, all of these things. We have quite a few economic development people in the room, so I'd be curious to hear from them or others. This is a really difficult industry from which to measure precision. So the only idea I have at the moment is obviously some kind of survey that tries to ask intelligent questions and target the population to see what works. After that, I'm to be honest with you, I'm really not quite sure. So I'm going to leave it at that and see if there's some other comments and thoughts.
I've got one. This is Barry here from Vancouver Island. Um, Tourism organizations are really good at tracking who's coming to visit different areas and who's traveling around. And I know on Vancouver Island there's a program to track cell phone tower use to understand where people are moving from to Vancouver Island or coming to visit Vancouver Island. So, that data that is available, the metadata, that may be useful in terms of tracking where populations of people are moving from urban centers to rural or rural to urban, and maybe even within subregions. So that's just possibly one way to approach it.
Oh, Barry, you just reminded me as well, and that's a really great point. We had a gentleman by the name of Asif Khan in our session a week or two ago, and he actually has a software technology that tracks meta or not macro data, not micro data, kind of along the similar lines as you. So Carol, you did mention technology. So there's two maybe bits of technology that exist already that we just need to dig a little deeper on to get some info on. But Asif, for sure, is a possible resource to help us.
Yeah, he was here earlier in the call, but I think he had to leave for another session. Now, I know that Jen just joined us on stage a bit ago, but Lee, I know you joined us as soon as Carol asked that question. So Lee, I wanted to ask you before Jen, did you want to participate in Carol's question as well?
Hi there. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question, especially given the pandemic, which, as we all know, has accelerated a lot of trends that were already happening. And we're seeing changes right now in our communities and economies, and where, how we choose to live and work at, a pace and a rate that we haven't seen since, the first era of industrialization, where all, the global urbanization levels began. And now we're seeing, and I think this is a really important trend that's going to start to define how we continue to build and grow cities at all levels, is looking at a significant level of deurbanization that's taking place now from major urban centers, which is going to have an impact, positively and negatively on tier 2, tier 3 cities and regions. And looking at the data in terms of data sources, I find that LinkedIn is an excellent data source in terms of how people are moving around, at what rate, where they're going. But also real estate organizations do a lot of tracking in terms of where people are moving, what the demographics look like, what kind of housing they're seeking in what kinds of regions. And so keeping an eye on those types of sources is going to be really important. But also from the community perspective and economic development development perspective, really understanding over the next 10 years, and most of us, do planning in 5 and 10-year increments. But over the next 10 years, what people are seeking is, already starting to change dramatically around remote workers. And, it's going to be more incumbent on communities now to think about what does urban planning and economic planning look like in terms of accommodating those major social and economic changes. And so all the way down to the ground design level around, what does your house look like in 10 years from now, and creating those spaces to work from home remotely and partly at work. And as we already have discussed today, office spaces are being completely revamped. Billions of dollars are being spent worldwide right now on completely transforming, spaces that people work in. So not just at home, but in that workplace, but also, in communities, and communities that have any kind of livability and affordability, assuming there's, good connectivity, are starting to come to the forefront like never before.
Really great insights as well, Lee. Thank you. I wanted to include Jen in the conversation because I know she enjoyed this earlier, but I wanted to reset the room really quick. Thank you all for joining us today. Dan and I are we are talking about the subject of remote work. What does remote work look like now, and what's it going to look like in the future? So if you haven't yet, check out all the speakers on stage. Be sure to follow them. These are people that are thought leaders in not just this topic, but in economic development in general. So show some love to the speakers, give them a follow. And if you have a question, if you're in the audience there and you wanted to participate on stage, if you hit that button with the hand icon over the notepad looking button, press that and that raises your hand and we can invite you on stage. And of course, as Dan mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded. We are hoping to use it as a podcast for content, so just be aware of that as well. And let me throw it over to Jen. Jen, thank you for joining us on stage. Did you want to contribute to the conversation?
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks to both of you for putting this together too. This is a space that I'm looking forward to participating in more as a lonely economic developer in a rural region for a municipality. But if you guys haven't seen it, and maybe someone mentioned this, and I apologize if they did, but there is a really interesting article that was published this last weekend by Richard Florida on how remote work is reshaping America's urban geography, and talking about Zoom towns. I mean, what brings to mind to me is how flexible can we be? And I think we're going to be challenged to be more flexible going forward as lifestyles change. And also, I'm sure, those who might be in, what's being referred to as Zoom towns and those smaller areas where people may be moving to, that's a pendulum swinging one way, and we really don't know the extent to which that will stick or if that will move back the other way. But I'm also thinking, and I have more questions than answers about, what does this mean for tourism as people who are able to work from anywhere might be able to take trips at any time and work part of that time while their families are enjoying a different place. So I'm thinking about those things and their impacts on smaller rural communities and rural communities' ability to keep up while also, ensuring that we are not, overbuilding, but recognizing that we have these constraints with housing, certainly in the Pacific Northwest and other areas right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Really great thoughts, Jen, as well. I'm just Googling the article now on the Wall Street Journal, so I'm going to have a good read after lunch. That's awesome. Mark, thank you for joining us on stage. Did you want to contribute to the conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I had a little trouble getting on earlier, so I missed, a good part of the call here. But it was good talking to you the other day about this kind of new field of it's a new program area for economic developers. I've been an economic development professional probably going on 40 years. 10 years ago, we started a think tank trying to figure out how you do economic development, especially in rural areas now that most people are out of the recruiting game. And and about 5 years ago, we started playing around with a program approach that you could apply like any other economic development effort, where you either recruit remote workers, or you start them up, or you help advance and expand them. And are in the third year of what is I consider a minimum viable program approach. Been running it in a small town west of Albuquerque, a little rural town of 9,000 people. And last year we were able to find 100 local residents who were underemployed or unemployed, and work with them, train them, get them credentialed, place them in a remote work job that they could do from home, or a co-working space. Developed a co-working space, and then actually got the state of New Mexico to fund the program like an economic development program. So for every person we pull through the program and get placed, the program gets $3,700, and that covers essentially the operations. And we placed, I think, around 110 people out of the program so far in the last year. So it's really starting to work. The one really big hurdle is keeping everybody employed, because it's pretty isolating work. So we've had to develop a strategy for a back end ecosystem of support, so you can socialize the people in the community. But 100 people in a community of 9,000 with a county population of 25,000 is a pretty big deal.
Really great thoughts, Mark. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to head back up our speakers list and return to Angelique, because we had you invited on stage. Angelique, we didn't give you a chance to participate as well. So I wanted to check in and see if you had any thoughts on the conversation at all.
Hey, everybody. Yes, thank you for inviting me. I've just been listening to everybody. Excuse me. And everything's relevant. Everything's relevant. I think everybody, we're all in, the community or economic development space, but, people are definitely in different environments and things. And so it's definitely been interesting just listening to what people, how people feel, the direction should go. I'm not really here with any, savior answers. I mean, all I can really just do is, share, what's working and some ideas that I hope to see change around here. So I'm up in Milwaukee. I'm a business improvement district director, and I'm revitalizing a commercial Main Street corridor that has about 230 commercial parcels. And so for me, remote work has been incredible, because I do a lot of, I'm the boots on the ground, so I'm doing a lot of work in the community, and I felt like prior to the pandemic I was scrambling a little bit more, and this has been some great downtime and planning time for a planner, because I'm definitely a planner, but I'm also a doer. And so I feel like I have been doing some amazing things. We did a historic virtual charrette. So the city of Milwaukee saw its first virtual charrette. We did just intensive planning and placemaking for our district. It was just incredible, an incredible experience. And that was the push through the pandemic, where I was posed with the question: do we want to postpone our charrette, because we had started it in person, and we had just finished our last focus group, because we had 3 focus groups: one with residents, one with investors and developers, and one with business owners, the existing business owners in the district. And so we just had finished our last one like the first week of March. And then they just asked, and we had like 5 different architectural companies, the city of Milwaukee, the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee's School of Architecture and Urban Planning, everybody at the table during this. So they just asked me and put me on the spot, and I said, yo, let's plan. I don't want the hold up, because that's the biggest part behind the work that we do. We want to come and ask for funding. The first question is, where's your plans? And so what it did, what I think that it's done, for one, is shown us that you know a lot of the sitting in the office and things like that is really not really as necessary as it's been made. This whole 8-hour workday thing, and sitting in the office, we've been, some of us has been um, just as productive working from home, but I do like to still engage in the community. So that was a little bit difficult working from home too, because I don't have people come to my personal home, social distance, and have a meeting. So because there's sometimes where I do have to meet contractors and things out on the street and whatnot, or just meet with them prior to the install of you know something. So I think that's been a little difficult, but I'm hoping that we have in Milwaukee a whole lot of the mall model have failed. I think in a lot of places, but the mall, we have a lot of empty large malls what used to be shopping strips and things like that. That I'd like to see them redevelop into more affordable housing, mixed use housing, to reduce the size of the space, of the commercial space. So, situate the affordable housing above smaller commercial spaces. And I'd like to see more cooperatives and also co-working spaces, and that include like podcasting places where people can rent out and things. And I think it's just shown that need for that. Everybody doesn't have that space in their home to create that office and whatnot. So I'd like to see some of those changes happening in our city, because it's a bustling metropolitan city, and it would be really cool to help the people who are getting back to work um, during COVID, find spaces that they're comfortable, that they can be professional. And everybody just doesn't have that environment at the home. While I was able to carve that out, because I live in a small 3-bedroom house alone, I was able to do that, but everybody hasn't been able to really create that comfortable space. And I think that some people haven't been able to be as productive because of that. But so that's just kind of like a well-rounded um, thought process, I guess, in my mind. Um, I don't have any particulars, I guess, outside of really wanting to see more of the co-oping and collaboratives too. Like, Americans are a lot more lazy. We don't want to, drive around from store to store to store in strip malls. People like to kind of go in like this one building that has several shops, and we've been watching them be extremely successful here, and even in my corridor, self um storefronts. Um, we have a lot of vacancies, which are, to me, opportunities. So it depends on how you look at it. I don't see a vacancy always as a negative thing. I see it as an opportunity. But I'd like to start helping small businesses scale up, teach them how to co-op a space, save more money until they're ready to get to that next level. So that's what I have to contribute, you guys.
Those are amazing thoughts. Thank you. Thank you so much. For those unfamiliar with the Clubhouse platform, when you hear something that really resonates with you, if you quickly press your mute button over and over, it signifies clapping. So I definitely wanted to put a clap to that as well. Thank you. That's wonderful. So it's only 12:43. I wanted to throw out a question here, Dan. I hope you don't mind, to the group, and get some insights, because one of the concepts I'm hearing, I don't know if I'd call it concern or cautionary tale around remote work, is this idea that, well, remote work can give you access to a higher pool of skilled labor, which is great, but then there is this fear that, are we worried that local communities, especially rural communities, are going to have a harder time finding great work locally, because those employers might be actually looking at talents in other places? How do we sort of find this? And I think I think it was Barry that mentioned that program that he was working on helps to alleviate that. But I'd love to hear from any other economic development or community professionals around, how do we really marry this idea of, in an age of remote work, how are we ensuring local employers and local talent are still able to connect and benefit from one another? Maybe Laura,
Well,
I guess.
Yeah, so, having really been involved in talent conversations over the last 5 years, when unemployment rates in two of the communities I'd worked in, both in Utah and Virginia, had really low unemployment rates, the conversation around talent and talent retention became critical. And also, as you mentioned, Bob, the connection between talent and local employers. And so you saw economic development organizations, not only in these two states, but really across the country, begin to look at how do they retain their talent and expand it? How do you encourage someone to come and work in your community? And a number of communities have done a great job in putting together websites that are almost like tourism websites, but for talent. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is Minneapolis-St. Paul. They did a phenomenal website, sort of trying to overcome sort of the perceptions of the cold weather in Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota. And I think there's a number of other communities that have done a great job in putting together those talent websites. And so I think economic development organizations need to have that as part of their focus, not just in recruiting the companies, but also in recruiting and retaining the talent.
Thank you, Laura. That's wonderful. Lee, did you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's an amazing question, Bob and Lara. Really appreciated your comments. I think a lot of it today is, in terms of competitiveness and resiliency, helping employers in our communities become better employers and therefore maintain better retention of their employees is going to be an important focus and an increasingly important focus going forward, which certainly a lot of economic development practitioners are already doing in terms of, business management, looking at competitive advantages. But I think that the retention of those really good employees is going to be more important than ever.
That's another really great thought. I was coming from an employer perspective, but from an employee perspective, you're right. There's a lot more options there in a remote work environment for them to find opportunities as well.
Bob, if I may, building on the conversation, so the town of Innisfil is actually developing a remote work first policy. So I mentioned before, as part of our work, we're looking at how do we position our town as a place from which it's a great place to be a remote worker. And we mentioned a bunch of different amenities. And one of the ideas is advocacy. So whether that's the solution or not about what we're talking about, but the idea, looks like I have a poor connection. Hopefully you can still hear me. The idea is that we help employers understand the competitiveness and the mobility that is kind of new and assist the employers to become better employers as part of this retention strategy. So I just put that out there. The other thing, maybe, since I have the floor, and I'm sorry we missed, Asif had to jump back in. I wanted to grab him. But I want to sort of play on what Angelique said, which is a bit of a recurring theme that I'm hearing in the call, which is flexibility and this idea that old spaces can become new spaces and spaces can become flexible, whether they're co-working, whether it is daycare, whether it is, interactive support, whether it's temporary space for like hours at a time, etc. So this whole idea of flexibility and maybe modularity are other themes that I'm just delighted to have heard come up in the conversation.
Maybe I could jump in. Oh, Laura, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to give everybody the email or the website address for the Minneapolis-St. Paul Talent Recruitment website.
Yes, please.
It is Make It MSP. And I think it's .org. It is .org. MakeItMSP.org. And it's honestly one of the best talent websites I've seen. So, sorry, Barry. Thank you for letting me jump in there.
Thank you, Laura. Barry.
Yeah, I just got a couple of points. One, one is that, to me, I'm struggling with whether to attract remote workers to come to the region or not. So, and like on Vancouver Island, we have a Vancouver Island tech attraction strategy, and this year we're working to build that out to attract tech companies to the region to build a kind of tech landscape ecosystem within Vancouver Island. But a much easier approach would be right now to attract tech workers to Vancouver Island and to the region. But at the same time, what we're experiencing through COVID is a lot of people moving to rural areas now that maybe they need more space, they can remote work, maybe they're feeling the constraints of living in big cities and the stress related to that during COVID. But we've had a lot of people moving here, and as a result, housing prices have increased significantly, and I expect that trend to continue. So it's kind of that dichotomy of, yes, you could attract more high wage earners and more talent to rural communities. In fact, they want to come here anyway, now that those kind of barriers have been removed and incentives put in place. But then at the same time, all the people who are existing and living here are now going to face exacerbated problems with increased housing prices, and already with a housing crisis within the region, you're just further accelerating that. So that's kind of the key question in my mind is, should we be attracting remote workers where you're actually pushing against another limit, which in our case is housing. And then, and I'd love anyone's thoughts on that. And then maybe just one idea that I came up with around the need for amenities and childcare and all these things for remote work. And one thing that municipalities and regional districts, etc., have already in place is community centers. They have flexible spaces that are underutilized right now. They have, and oftentimes, childcare. They have rooms that could easily be turned into conference rooms. So the addition of remote work spaces within that, albeit like shared office space, or private quiet time rooms, I think could be good fit. Done speaking. Thank you. It's Barry.
Really great topic. Yeah, who would Dan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to jump in. So I don't know that this is the solution. So Barry, I know what you're concerned about is throwing gasoline on the fire with respect to housing. And Brennan and I have talked about this in a slightly different way. Maybe the problem is supply. So municipalities, by their very nature being governing bodies that are also subject to higher levels of governing bodies, sometimes it's difficult to bring housing onto the marketplace. So I'm not going to get into attainable and affordable housing, which are very much issues that we need to tackle. But maybe just figuring out how to allow supply to come on stream to meet demand in some sort of way. Well, it might not be instantaneous in the next 12 months. And I don't know that I hate to say this. Sometimes even overbuilding is not necessarily a bad thing because it helps readjust things. So I don't think that's the be all and the end all to what you're talking about, but I really do think we need to figure out how to be more market responsive to supply what needs to be supplied when the demand is there.
Sorry, Laura, did you want to add to the chat?
Yeah, I would love to. So the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is a CDFI in the US, recently launched a program to co-locate childcare centers. And it is a funding mechanism to assist communities in making sure that we're providing those childcare opportunities as part of our planning. So whether it's for example, in Utah, we did a project where the first floor was childcare, and then above it was affordable housing. And we placed that project across the street from a metro station or a transit station that allowed for someone to be able to place your child in care right where they lived, but then get on a transit facility to get to their job. And I think we need to be thinking about how do we incorporate these needs like childcare and fresh foods into projects, so that we are providing for greater equity in our communities.
Another great thought for sure. I don't have a good answer for that. I wonder if anyone else in the room wanted to participate on that one.
It's a tough one, Bob. Maybe we need to start repurposing shipping containers into instant housing to keep prices in check. I don't know. I'm sure there's some other creative solutions. Barry, I feel for you. I think what you're really asking is, geez, I have a good community. So maybe the question, they're going to come anyway, I think is what I'm hearing. They may come in droves, for lack of a better term, if you put the gas on the pedal. I don't know. I guess the question is there a way maybe to add value and to increase the kind of employment for existing people? And again, I'm not sure that's the solution. It's a really tough question. This whole housing thing, I've seen several municipalities grappling with the issue for decades and not really solving it.
Well, perhaps, Dan, that's a good question for us to put out to our LinkedIn community when we do our postmortem, because Dan is always great at repurposing the content from these chats. And perhaps, Barry, will see some responses from there that would invite some solutions for sure.
Bob, I've got pretty well a hard stop at 1, and I know we want to be respectful, so I'm going to let you kind of corral the last 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll call it a day. So far, this has been an incredible conversation, so I want to thank everybody. I'm so appreciative of the intelligence and the knowledge and the skills, and not to pick on anybody in particular, but I do want to give Lara an extra shout out. One of her colleagues gave her some props on LinkedIn, and she's just been this accidental discovery and adds value every time. So thank you so much for your contribution, everybody. And for today, I'm just going to pick on you, Lara.
Well, thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure to be part of these conversations.
Also, to Dan's point, thank you all for participating. I think what we're going to do, Dan, is this has been a recorded session, so I know Dan is really great at repurposing content. So we invite you all, if you haven't yet, the speakers as well as the listeners in this room, to make sure you follow everyone, especially myself and Dan, because as we continue to add to this conversation and other conversations around economic development, I think our goal here, Dan, if you don't mind me saying, is it's really about us trying to build a community of global economic development officers to have these conversations. What works in a state in the US might work really well in a community in Germany. So it's really about facilitating more and more of these conversations. So I think our ask is that please do connect with us. Please share with us what your thoughts are. Most importantly, Dan and I are hungry for topics. We can talk about economic development all the live long day, but really I think we want to know from all of you, what are those economic or community economic development issues that are plaguing you, that you're not just finding the right answer for, or maybe you found a success on something and you'd really like to share with us what's worked well in your community that we can, as Dan and I like to say, rob and duplicate in other communities. So we're a little bit early ahead of time, but I will end it there. And I do, again, of course, want to thank everyone for participating. And Dan, we are back here again, same time, same day. Next week, I should say.
Yeah, next Wednesday. I can't remember if I have a topic or not, but it is on St. Patrick's Day. And I think part of the theme, and Bob, you can help me as well, is it's Luck of the Irish, which is the harder I work, the luckier I get. I can't remember if I nailed an actual theme down or not for us. How's your memory?
No, I think you're right. But you know what? Since it's a special day, let's talk about tourism. We had a couple of people come in here about tourism. So maybe our next chat is around what does tourism look like post-COVID-19, which of course is a very, very, very tough conversation to have. What do you think, Dan? Do you think
absolutely. And I would just ask if anyone else had any final words they wanted to share before we sign off.
Yes, please do.
I just want to say thank you so much for the conversation. I look forward to more.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. All right, with that, everyone, please do enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you here next week, Wednesday at noon, around the rough topic of tourism and see what we can come up with as it relates to economic development. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.